Hello everyone and welcome back to the Academia and Research Collective. My name is Darren and today we will be talking about the extremely boring but extremely important topic of IRBs, or the Institutional Review Board. So let's get straight into it. First of all, what is an IRB? Well, an IRB is simply a committee that reviews research that involves humans to make sure that it is ethical, safe, and fair. And so, exactly from this description, you will need an IRB if you're conducting research that will involve humans in any way, so that you can keep them safe, you keep yourself safe, you can make sure that you're not violating any ethical guidelines, and the whole research process is just nice and clean. Now, why do we need this? Well, you need an IRB to prevent people from harm, right? IRBs review all of your paperwork, review all of your research procedures that you have outlined about what you will do in order to prevent physical harm, psychological harm, coercion or pressure, or a misuse of personal data. If you have something in your research plan that the Institutional Review Board, which is those group of scientists and professors who are reviewing your work, and they notice something that might cause harm, they're going to strike down your project. They're going to tell you to change it so that you don't cause any harm, whether it's physical or psychological. They also don't want you to, cross the ethical guidelines of forcing any participants into doing anything or misusing their personal data. One of the most important things in research is to make sure that when you collect data from people, that it is safe, it is secure, and you aren't spreading it willy-nilly, and that you are, anonymizing it, any of the data that you will be using. And so IRBs make sure that you are following all of those steps. They review your paperwork, they review your research plans meticulously to keep you and your researchers safe. Now, why do you need an IRB? Not why, when do I need an IRB? Well, an IRB, you need it if you are conducting surveys, interviews, or personal data, if you're researching human behavior or decision making, or if you're using medical or health data or data with personal identifiable information. You see how all of these three things involve humans: surveys, interviews, personal data is you asking people for something, human behavior or decision making, you're studying how humans are acting, and then medical and health data or anything of personal and identifiable information is of course linked to humans. And so whenever you have these things, you will need an IRB to review your research plan, to review what you are going to do. Now, when do I not need an IRB? Well, if you're using public anonymized data sets, then you don't need an IRB. If you are just looking at a data set that has been published and everything is, has been published according to IRB approvals and it's anonymized and it's public, then you won't need it. Now, if you're running simulations or models with fake human data, let's say you're just generating some model and this fake person was 40 years old and they had whatever, then you don't need an IRB there. Or if you're just using non-human data, right? If you're not collecting any data of any sorts, of any living things, maybe you're using plant data, then you do not need an IRB. And so these are kind of some of the caveats. Well, not really caveats, just when you don't need an IRB. Now, if you are doing a project of humans, everyone will need to fill out something known as an informed consent form. Informed consent is when you tell your participants, the research participants, the humans that are in your research, you need to tell them what they're agreeing to, you need to tell them the risks, they need to be able to say no, and they can quit at any time. And this is done through an informed consent form. Now, this is going to be more geared towards the science fair folks out there. This is the form from the International Science and Engineering Fair, but if you're doing actual research, you'll need something similar to this as well. But for ICEF, this is the human informed consent form that your human participants and you will all need to fill out. I've zoomed in on the part that you as the researcher will need to fill out, and there you need to talk about the purpose of your project. You need to tell your participants what they're going to do, how long they're going to spend participating in it, and the potential risks that they might encounter. And now, one of the most common mistakes I've seen is researchers who go, well, my project couldn't possibly have any risk. It's very safe, I'm using humans, but what risk could there possibly be? However, I had the same experience. Back then, when I was conducting a research project, I had some participants wear a pair of augmented reality goggles. I thought to myself, well, it's VR. What are the potential risks of VR? But when I was talking to researchers, they pointed out that, eye strain could be a potential risk. And even though eye strain probably isn't that big of a major issue, it's still a potential risk, and I should note it down. These IRBs, they're very, very specific, and they're very knowledgeable about their field of research. And if they see any potential risks, they are going to want you to mark it and write about it, because you would rather be safe than sorry when it comes to letting them know exactly what are all the potential risks. And you doing this also lets yourself know what you need to do in order to prevent those risks from happening. And in my case, it was to make sure that all of my human participants took breaks every 20 minutes. So from looking at screens so that they wouldn't get eye strain. And then finally, talk about the benefits, how confidentiality will be maintained. Remember, we talked about how it is very key that whenever you collect data from humans, you keep their personal information safe. And then lastly, you leave a spot for them to contact you if needed. And on the bottom of the form, you see where everyone is going to sign. If you're a minor or an adult, where you're going to sign, or you need parent or guardian approval. And so this is the human informed consent form. It goes over everything, at all potential risks, and make sure that you are not crossing any ethical guidelines. And so when you are presenting your information to the IRB, usually it's online now, especially for science fairs, you just submit everything online, you have to give them a research plan. And in that research plan, you talk about your project, you talk about what you're going to do, and where you're talking about what you're going to do and your procedures and methodology, you're going to need to write out exactly what data you're collecting from humans, how you're going to do it, how you're going to keep them safe, how you're going to keep all of the data you collect safe, all of the steps of of you collecting data from humans, along with this human informed consent form, a sample with everything that you've written in the purpose of the project. If you participate, you'll be asked 2 sections, so that the IRB will know exactly what you're going to do to protect everyone and to make sure that your project will keep all of the humans safe. So that's what you need to do when you are faced with the IRB. Now, the biggest thing, the biggest mistake I've seen with all research projects is that you should not collect any human data before getting IRB approval. You should not collect any human data before IRB approval. I have seen countless science fair research projects get completely disqualified because they got the IRB approval, but they were already collecting data beforehand. All of that data will be tossed out and your project will definitely be voided. If you're conducting actual research, they will definitely void your entire project, or they will just say that all the data you collected was totally useless. And so best case scenario, you just wasted you and some of the participants' time, but worst case scenario, it's a huge ethical violation and you have to face some consequences for it, or your whole project is thrown out. So please do not collect any human data before an IRB. If you're taking notes on this video, circle that, star that. If you are just mentally engraved into your brain to not do this ever. And so we'll end now with just a few examples, like I always like to do. Let's say that Johnny is doing a research project where he is asking students about how much they like a certain math class. And so he's taking a survey from these people, but since he's asking people and it involves a survey that has people answering a survey, well, then he will need an IRB, an institutional review board, before he can conduct his research, and he'll need to present the IRB of his entire research plan and the informed consent forms and what he is going to do to keep him and his participants safe. However, let's say I am training an AI model that is using a data set of people's brain tumors. Okay, let's see here. My data set involves people, and my data set involves medical data sets. Well, so that kind of seems like it's moving towards the direction of IRB. However, my data set, I've confirmed that it is a publicly published and all the data is anonymized. In that case, I don't need to get an IRB approval because everything has already gone through the IRB review to publish that data, and there has been, there's no identifiable information and everything is public. And in my case, I only need to note it down in my research plan that, I've used X, Y, and Z data sets, and then I'm all good. So yeah, that was the IRB, the Institutional Review Board. I know this topic is kind of tedious, but it's very, very important. I've seen a lot of projects that want to use human participants, and I highly encourage that. However, if you are doing a project that involves human participants, make sure you follow all of the steps of the IRB. Do not collect data before you have your IRB and everything like that sorted out, or else you will get thrown and you will cross a major ethical guideline. But I hope that you learned something here today. If you have any questions, leave it down below in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.